Directions for your winter tree silhouette. Don't forget your name and code on the back of your paper. You'll begin by using a pencil to divide up your paper into 3 sections with only 2 lines. You're going to create kind of wavy lines. They don't have to be straight. Kind of think of snowy hills. And they can be 4 fingers or so wide apart. It really just depends on how big you want your foreground, your middle ground, and your background to be. To start, I like to begin using warm colors for my sunset, or it could be a sunrise if you choose. Doesn't matter, but it's probably best to use warm colors nearest to the sun so we understand that that is what it is in your sky. And to do this, I'm creating kind of a rainbow or C-shape kind of curve, and you can overlap colors as long as they are similar, so you don't end up making mud. Please be sure to refer to a color wheel if you forgot, or you can always test on a placemat to check and see what might happen if 2 colors bump. I'm going to use yellow near the top, and then I'm going to use some orange and overlap the colors to have them blend together. These are fluorescent watercolors, so they're a little bit stubborn sometimes. You might have to overlap them gently so you don't put a hole in your paper a couple times to get the kind of desired color that you're looking for. Sometimes adding water can help them to blend together too. So if you just gently dip your brush into your bucket, and then it will help the colors to kind of blend together more easily. Remember, if you have to, grab a little more color because sometimes these are a little bit stubborn. Just remember when you are painting your sky and the rest of the way that you're choosing colors that are safe to put together. When you're finished with that, you'll work on your middle ground, and this is kind of just snowy hills, so we're not going to make it very dark. We're just going to add a little bit of wispy lines using any of the cool colors to create some snowy hills. And my brush is kind of still watery, and the water and the paint makes it a little bit more transparent, and that's what I'm going for here. So just using some cool colors, not fully painting it in, just adding some wispy lines to create some hills. And lastly, the foreground is what we're painting in. And this area is going to be a little bit more dark and shadowy, so I'm adding my paint without a wet paintbrush because I want it to be a little darker, the colors to be more bold. And I'm going to do a little bit more overlapping with colors, still sticking with a cool color theme because it is a winter silhouette. So you'll fill that in to your liking. And then what I like to do at the end to help my colors blend, like I did in the sunset, is just use a little bit of water on the top of my brush and gently blend those colors so that they kind of mesh together a little better. I highly recommend using practice paper or a placemat to get a feel for what the ink is like on a paintbrush because it's much more kind of watered down than paint is. So it's nice to get a feel for it before you actually get going on your official project. Much like you started with pencil to divide up the sections of your project, you're going to also start with ink, and then you'll go back later and add all the major details. I'm going to use the smallest of the green brushes. I'm going to make sure that the extra water is off my brush with a paper towel or sponge. And then I'm going to just make very thin, they do not have to be straight lines, kind of where my original pencil lines were. It's okay if they're a little bit wobbly, it gives your paper some character, and it is not a precise painting. And I'm adding in extra little lines in my hills and the bottom as well because I want those to stand out in my foreground. And then I'm going to just take my brush and dip it in my water, and it kind of creates more of a grayish color instead of the dark black that the ink creates. You can also test it to see if it is light enough or dark enough to your liking. And then I'm gonna go back and add some extra shadows. I'm gonna add shadows where I plan to add teeny little trees in the background. You can do yours the opposite of mine. It does not have to be identical to what I choose. This is just a suggestion, just adding shadows, and then later on we'll add some details. I'm going to add some little pine trees off here to the right, some just little tiny ones off in the distance in the background. So I'm adding a very light gray shadow where I know my trees will be. Remember, you don't have to do the same kind of trees. You could do more similar trees to what's going to be in your foreground, but I decided I want to do more of a pine tree appearance in my background just to kind of give some variety. These I just started with a little straight line and then some wispy lines going downward, almost like you're creating the top of a letter, capital letter A, over and over again. Just quick wispy little lines. You can always practice this stuff on your placemat before you do it on your project, because sometimes it's a little intimidating at first. But remember, this is kind of a wispy kind of project. We're not looking for super precise lines. When you add your shadow, you are doing the same thing, creating the same thing, but it's just going to be upside down. If you need to turn your paper, if that's helpful, then go ahead and turn your paper carefully so you don't accidentally bump any ink. And that might make it a little easier to help you visualize what the shadow will look like on the ground. Now I'm going to move back to my foreground and add my large tree before any of the other details. It's kind of helpful because if you add a fence, then you know where your tree is going to be. However, if you do it different, that's okay. So if you think of a tree, they're wider at the bottom of the base of the trunk, and then they kind of get skinnier. You'll have to kind of make adjustments as you go. If you practice this, it could be helpful, or maybe take a little break from your official project and practice on a placemat. So I'm kind of creating almost like a Y shape, and then I go back in and add more, a little Y kind of shape. So tree branches sort of point upward and create like a V or a Y shape. And I'm just blocking in where I want my branches to be. Later on, we will add the small ones. Right now I'm just getting like the main part of my tree sort of blacked out with the top of my paintbrush, just very gently, and you can always go back and kind of change it as you go. Then I just fill it in so it's nice and dark. This is just the main part of my tree. There are no little branches at this time. Then you'll add the kind of medium size branches. And it is helpful to try this first. My paper that I'm doing this on is a little bit bumpy, but what you do is you press your brush down and you gently lift it up as you're creating a branch. It does take some practice, and it's totally fine if they're wobbly because tree branches are not straight. So I went ahead and I just added some kind of wider branches where I felt it looked like it needed some. And then I will grab my smallest grain brush and I'm going to do the same thing, doing that same kind of process where you're pushing down a little bit and lifting it up. Use the very tippy top of your brush and create some kind of wobbly lines and fill in where it appears to be kind of empty with these little branches, and it really brings your tree to life. Remember, your branches are kind of wobbly and they're making sort of like Y or V shapes all over your tree. And as my last kind of major detail, I'm going to add the fence, and that is on the bottom line of your middle ground. So basically that first line that you drew with pencil. And I'm just going to add my fence post first, and I'm not making sure they're precise. I want them to be a little bit wobbly. However, if you want yours more straight, go for it, that's fine. And I'm also gonna add lines going across. I'm gonna add 3, but maybe you prefer the appearance of 2. Maybe you want a slightly different style fence. That is completely fine. You can always add extra fence posts as you go if you feel like it kind of needs it. So as you see, as I'm working here, I decide, oh, that looks like a pretty big gap, so I just go ahead and add another post and finish it so that I have a fence going all the way across that top line there of my foreground. For a final touch, you will just add some shadows like I did for the trees that I did way in the background. And I'm using that really watered down ink. I would definitely check to make sure that it is gray and not dark black, or maybe it's too light. You can make adjustments if you need to. So I'm going to add shadows where my tree is, and it's going to be wide and then gradually get a little bit skinnier like the tree does because the shadow is cast on the ground. I'm going to add some more shadows kind of where my fence is and wherever I feel like I might need a shadow. So you might have some different details than me and might have to add some different shadows. So entirely up to you. Just kind of go through, add some shadows, and that is it for this project.